July 1st, 1898. A blazing Cuban sun beats down on a ridge called San Juan Hill. Bullets are screaming through the air. Men are falling. And somewhere in that chaos, a future president of the United States is charging uphill on horseback. That's the story you know. But here's what you were never told. The men who actually broke through the Spanish defenses first were black soldiers. Soldiers who were almost completely erased from the history books. This is the real story of San Juan Hill. To understand San Juan Hill, we need to go back to 1898. Cuba was fighting for independence from Spain, and the United States was watching very closely. Then came a disaster. The American battleship USS Maine mysteriously exploded in Havana Harbor, killing 266 American sailors. The American press poured fuel on the fire. "Remember the Maine" became the battle cry of the nation. President McKinley declared war on Spain. It was called Splendid Little War, quick, decisive, and glorious. But to claim that glory, American forces had to get past one thing, a fortified ridge called San Juan Hill. The Rough Riders. Who were they really? Enter Theodore Roosevelt. At the time, he was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, but there was only one thing on his mind: going to war and winning glory. He resigned his post, formed a volunteer cavalry regiment, and called them the Rough Riders, a mix of Ivy League athletes, Western cowboys, and frontiersmen. The press absolutely loved them. They were photogenic, dramatic, and led by a man who knew exactly how to work a camera. Roosevelt understood that war meant fame, and fame meant political power. But when the Rough Riders arrived in Cuba, they were in serious trouble, disorganized, low on ammunition, and facing a deadly Spanish defense line ahead of them. The Buffalo Soldiers, America's forgotten warriors. Now let's talk about the men that history forgot. The 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments, known as the Buffalo Soldiers. These were black American soldiers, many of them veterans of the Indian Wars. Some of the most experienced and battle-hardened troops in the entire United States Army. Their nickname came from Native American warriors who respected their fierce fighting spirit and gave them this name as a mark of honor. But back home, they faced segregation, racism, and second-class citizenship. They fought for a country that did not fully recognize them as equal human beings. Yet, when the call came, they answered on July 1st as the Rough Riders stalled under heavy Spanish fire on Kettle Hill. It was the Buffalo Soldiers of the 9th and 10th Cavalry who surged forward. They pushed up the slope, broke the Spanish line, and opened the path that allowed everyone, including the Rough Riders, to advance. The real battle of San Juan Hill. Here's what the textbooks say in a single sentence. Roosevelt and the Rough Riders charged San Juan Hill. Here is what actually happened. The assault involved multiple regiments attacking simultaneously across both Kettle Hill and the San Juan Heights. Colonel Theodore Roosevelt did charge, and he was brave. Nobody denies that. But throughout the entire attack, his regiment was flanked and supported by the Buffalo Soldiers. Witnesses on the ground reported seeing black soldiers leading the charge up the steepest sections, drawing enemy fire onto themselves, and covering the Rough Riders' advance the entire way up. Lieutenant John J. Pershing, the man who would later command all American forces in World War I, said this about the Buffalo Soldiers. They fought their way into the hearts of the American people. Spain was defeated. Santiago fell within weeks. And the man the newspapers wrote about almost exclusively? Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt's controversial remarks. After the battle, Roosevelt was celebrated as a national hero. He rode that fame all the way to the White House in 1901. But in a magazine article published shortly after the war, Roosevelt made comments suggesting that some black soldiers had lost their nerve during the battle and had to be forced forward by their officers. The Buffalo Soldier veterans were outraged. They pushed back publicly and provided eyewitness testimony that directly contradicted everything Roosevelt had claimed. Roosevelt later partially walked back his statements. And to his credit as president, he did invite Booker T. Washington to dine at the White House, the first time a black man had officially dined there. But the damage to the historical record was already done. For decades, the Buffalo Soldiers remained a footnote, a supporting cast in somebody else's story. Legacy and why it still matters today. Today, monuments to the Buffalo Soldiers stand across the United States. The Buffalo Soldiers National Museum in Houston preserves their legacy and their story. Their contribution to San Juan Hill is no longer disputed by any serious historian. But why does this still matter 125 years later? Because history shapes identity. Who we choose to celebrate tells us who we value. And for generations of Black Americans, their ancestors' sacrifice was stolen, replaced by a narrative that was simply easier for some people to tell. The real story of San Juan Hill is not about taking away Roosevelt's courage. It is about adding the truth that was left out. It is about the men who charged that hill knowing their country did not fully claim them, and charging anyway. That deserves to be known. That deserves to be remembered. If this video changed the way you see history, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more Untold history every single week. I'll see you next time.